I'd really like to dare look to the future in the spirit of Nicola saying, let's be less cautious. So if we were to look ahead to the future, if we can sort of summarize it without, and being, mindful of managing expectations and the sensitivities around that, if we could look to the future, what can people expect? What can they hope to expect from gene therapies, but also from other innovative technologies? Matthew, I'd like to come to you first on that.
So I am jumping ahead into the future, so managing expectations from anybody that might be watching. But I see a world where there is a high degree of standardization, and which enables two things. One is a reduced cost of manufacture, which enables much more sharing between the manufacturers and the healthcare system, but it also enables the more rapid development of new therapeutics in new areas. So I see a very rapidly expanding repertoire of potential therapeutics because people are dropping one innovation into an area of standardization that's been well tested and well proven, and therefore the development process can be much faster and reach many more people. Going beyond the developed economies out into the wider global population.
Oh yeah, wonderful. I think that's important to touch on that for sure. Sheila, what would be your let's look really far ahead and be optimistic.
I mean, for me, the ability for the system to be well prepared and allow that access, and as Matthew's kind of alluded to, being much more prepared around the adoption. So, being able to kind of provide good education and guidance and support for the healthcare system, for patients and families around what can be expected, and the ability that they aren't as costly as they are, and actually that the concerns that we have now are alleviated, and people are much more comfortable in saying, okay, yep, that's for me, I'm going to go for it.
I guess, but believing a bit in the magic. So Nicola, what does it look like for you?
I think it's really important that industry and the biotech industry have a seat at the table, and that we continue to collaborate. I still think there's some boundaries and divides up there, and people don't always have the open and honest conversations early enough. So I'd like to see those barriers broken down, and for it to be a much more collaborative discussion, with patients having the choice. So patients being more empowered around how much risk they're prepared to take on the uncertainty piece.
Thank you. And Jeff, from your perspective?
Yeah, actually, building on a little bit on what Nicola was saying, yeah, what I see in the future is that you have basically a menu of treatment options that people can genuinely go into their haemophilia centre or go to see their consultant in another area and consider gene therapy alongside other options for managing their condition, or other treatment options as well, and then make a genuine choice for them on is this the right treatment for me? Is it perhaps the right treatment for me now, or is it the right treatment for me in a few years' time? But really, that there's so much promise and so much possibility, with this kind of new style of treatment, that we think it's really important that those kind of become available to people, and that people are able to make the choice and access them. In terms of what I think the future holds, I think there is and this comes up to something kind of Matthew mentioned earlier about the system, is actually there's probably a decision point about, do you kind of center this in kind of hubs of expertise in cell and gene therapies, or do you center these in hubs of expertise in treating the condition that the cell or gene therapy treats? And I think that probably doesn't need to be a binary decision. I think it probably varies a little bit, because in haemophilia care, I think it makes sense to center cell and gene therapies in haemophilia centers as an existing infrastructure for those. But as we add more and more cell and gene therapies to the commission treatments that the NHS can use, it may make sense to kind of build expertise in that area more broadly and structure it differently. So I think that's kind of the future challenge is how do you structure the NHS in order to ensure that the most eligible patients are routed to these treatments as soon as possible.
Thank you. And Sam?
I think my wish for the future, and I think this is a wish at the moment, would be that the stats that I started off with at the beginning of 95% of rare diseases not having a treatment and 5% having a treatment would be perhaps modified and changed, if not flipped round, because I think that's for me, that's the potential that we could see. But I'm trying to manage expectations, and it's going to take a long time, and it's not going to be an easy journey. But I think it is the promise, I think, of this scientific advance.
I think that brings us into such a lovely circle. We started with that notion of hope, and we've kind of ended to actually the real promise of hope that this brings. We've got so many questions that have come in while we've been talking, as well as from the participants. I'd like to use this time to get through as many of these. It'd be such a waste to have you all on here and not answer these, particularly in the spirit of education and the importance we've identified that. So I'm just going to dive into the questions. So the first one we've got here, which is a really good question, is do you foresee insurance and reimbursement hurdles with gene therapies? So Sheila, probably one for you. So I guess this is more looking at, you know, perhaps not in the UK, but more in the US, I guess, where patients have to navigate insurance.
I think historically it's not been that difficult, but I think, you know, even in the US and in other countries, you know, things are becoming a bit more challenging. The financial environment is very different to what it was a few years ago, and I think a lot of healthcare systems, including insurers, are starting to be a bit more aware of value in different contexts, you know, not in the same context as we would maybe define it here in the UK, but I certainly feel, based on kind of the conversations I've had with people around the globe, that people are starting to wake up to that. So I think, yes, it might become a bit more challenging, but, you know, maybe that's the kind of, you know, going back to that kind of innovation curve of early adopters, and then this kind of piece around how to kind of build the right landscape. And there's just much more work that needs to be done in that space. So yeah, I do think there's going to be a challenge given the number of therapies that are coming through the pipeline as well.
So I guess this is part of that holistic approach, is it, making sure that the education meets that sector as well, isn't it? And, you know, that they're brought along on the journey. Another really excellent question here, which I think might be one for you, Matthew. Do panelists believe that a task force style approach similar to that used by the government to develop and roll out COVID-19 vaccines is necessary to mobilize all parts of the healthcare system to respond to the challenges posed by the gene therapies?
The answer to that is yes and no. So yes, we need to take the really beneficial parts of the vaccines task force, the ability to take a helicopter view, the ability to take action and work quickly. I think the no part of it is this is not a quick win. We have to get over a crisis situation. This is a long-term planning, the development of infrastructure for those that are not yet born to be able to benefit from the things that we are doing as well. So yes, there are things we can learn. Yes, there needs to be a more coordinated action, and there needs to be high adoption of the responsibility within the governmental systems to make it happen.
Excellent, thank you. Another very good question here. Several gene therapy companies have withdrawn from the market in recent years, with reimbursement and value not being recognised to what they deem an acceptable level by payers. How do we ensure that patients have access to these products? I don't know who wants to take that one. Is that you, Nicola? Is that you, Sheila? Who feels they could respond to that? It's an emotive one, I know.
I think it's a very difficult one. So even more so in this space, because the manufacturing piece is such an integral part of it and often is very personalized, if a company does not have the manufacturing set up and withdraws, and the NHS hasn't got the service and system set up, it's going to be very, very difficult. We're in a very different scenario. You can't just buy it in from America because the FDA have said yes and suddenly have it here. Very sad scenario for the families that are impacted or the individuals that are impacted, but we need to find a system solution, not an individual patient by patient system.
Yeah. Is there anything you wanted to add to that, Sheila?
I mean, I kind of echo what Nicola is saying, and I think what we've got to remember in this situation, you know, in the absence of all the things that Nicola has said, say, for example, a family decides to self-fund and go to the US to receive this treatment. Actually, there's real challenges around the aftercare. If you've not got knowledge in the system to support the patient and family, you're potentially opening yourself up to risks that the healthcare system may or may not be best placed to support. So yeah, it's a really complicated one, and I know there may be people thinking, well, if I, you know, do crowdfunding or other, I'll get the treatment. But actually, you've got to think carefully about the repercussions of the long-term effects that also need to be taken account of.
I think that's a really important piece to add on there. And this is a great question. I think somebody touched on this a little bit earlier about the payment model. So it says, is there a payment model that you think will increase access to gene therapies? I think you maybe mentioned, Sheila, that it almost needs its own new process. So do you want to expand a bit on that, on your thoughts there?
Sure. I mean, I think, you know, I think for me, there is a need for, so if you go back to the uncertainties in this space, the payment, a new way of paying for these therapies potentially gives us an opportunity to bridge the uncertainty gap. So when you've got a treatment that we're feeling a bit nervous about, and there are some unknowns both on the clinical side and on the patient side, having a model that enables payment to be made in stages as things work, or outcomes are delivered, and there's confidence, you know, makes it more palatable, and also manages in some respects the risks on both sides. So the risk to the healthcare system in spending money that may not have, you know, may not come to fruition in terms of patient outcomes and service and delivery outcomes, but also for the company who can then sort of manage and plan their budgeting and ensure that they're getting the most appropriate return on their investment, which I think, you know, based on my conversations with industry, you know, they're very open to have those dialogues. So I think, you know, there is a need to think about the different models and the different ways of doing things. But again, you know, I hate to say it, we're kind of coming back to this whole system approach, because the system as a whole needs to be able to transact these things. And unfortunately, the NHS, for, you know, whatever reason, there could be many, we could have another webinar on this entirely, but it's not currently well kitted out to be able to do these things at scale.
Yeah. Okay.
I was going to say,
Please do. Yeah.
Matthew, do you want to go first?
Okay. So about 8 years ago, I had the privilege of working with NICE on the viewing the introduction of CAR Ts before they came in, and they themselves, NICE and NICE, they themselves produced a number of potential models, recognizing that risk-based and performance-based models would be important. They were the first to open up the discussion, actually, and I think it's disappointing that we've made so little progress over that period of time. And I think it is one of the examples of where moving the dialogue to the class of therapeutics as opposed to the individual therapeutics is extremely important. To change the accounting systems and the legality of using performance-based models in the UK is expensive and requires considerable change. You can only really justify it if you talk about spreading that cost of the change over the entirety of the class of therapeutics rather than one individual therapeutic.
And Nicola?
Yeah, I was going to say similar. It's not an easy conversation. I think, as Sheila said, the industry and NICE themselves have been very open to have those conversations. But without a system change and registries in place and all of those things, it practically becomes quite difficult. But I also think we need to remember it's not always necessary, and it's not always going to answer the questions that are outstanding. So a lot of the uncertainty when you in front of a NICE committee is around what happens in 20 or 30 years time, and will it do what it says it does on the tin, nor the uncertainty of the next 4 or 5 years. And collecting data and modeling and splitting payments over that sort of time frame almost becomes unmanageable. So I think we need to be really clear, if we go down a payment model option, what are we trying to address, and is it necessary for everybody? Because there will be some conditions where the prevalent population is actually small enough that it's not appropriate or needed. So again, let's not just design something that's assumed to work for everybody. Let's look at it as a system basis. Think about, does it actually answer the questions? Do we really need it? And then do we need it for everybody?
Okay, thank you.
Do you mind if I quickly add something to that? So I think that kind of really leans really nicely into why we've not seen anything going into the Innovative Medicines Fund, particularly gene therapies, because, you know, theoretically, the kind of construct of the Innovative Medicines Fund is looking at very short-term, you know, 3 to 5 year programs. And actually, some of the answers that we're looking for in gene therapies are not necessarily going to be answered in that short space of time. So I'm not saying that it shouldn't be a tool that needs to be explored, but exactly as Nicola's described, this is where I think the Innovative Medicines Fund becomes a bit of a challenge to kind of adopt gene therapies for.
Yeah. Well, high costs seem to be weighing on everyone's mind because we've got a few questions relating to this. So next one is, innovative therapies for rare diseases are expected to be accessible to developing countries in a short time. With a high cost, these are unaffordable for many patients. Will AI lower prices? Matthew, maybe one for you. Is there scope in AI to help with this piece of the puzzle?
I'm very tempted to jump on the bandwagon. I'm sure it will contribute towards the speed of spreading of knowledge and information and the development of new information. I think the bigger contributions are the things that we said. I believe that gene therapies and cell therapies will be available on a global basis within my lifetime. But I think the bigger contribution will be the high volume uptake of cell and gene therapies and the adoption of standardized approaches that bring down the cost of manufacturing, delivery and adoption by log orders.
Great, thank you. Another one here regarding international collaboration. So do you see more international collaboration to evaluate and pay for rare and gene therapies? If yes, what would that look like to you? Anyone want to take that?
If I could weigh in on one
Jeff,
part.
yes, please do, yeah.
Actually, I think definitely on the evaluating side, we feel it's really important in haemophilia that there's an international database of people who have taken gene therapy with haemophilia, because of the low numbers of people that will be having it. If we really want to understand the effectiveness in the long term, and if we want to capture adverse events or other side effects that will be quite rare, then we need to do that by having an international database rather than just a UK database as we have at the moment. And so there's the process of being created a global gene therapy register. And really, I think my view is, if you want to capture things like integration events, if you want to capture kind of long-term the potential for cancers or other things, you actually need to spread that not just in a particular disease area, but actually across all the people using, say, AAV vectors and more broadly. So yes, I think that international collaboration is vital for seeing the long-term effectiveness, but also the potential for very rare side effects as well.
Excellent, thank you. Did you want to add something to that, Sheila? Oh, sorry, Nicola. I'll come to you.
I was just going to say, yeah, credit from my perspective to the Catapult, because I think actually from what I've seen, having worked in the industry for decades, I think the collaboration internationally in the gene and cell therapy space through groups like the Gene and Cell Therapy Catapult and Matthew's group, but with ARM, with the International Society, and across various different organisations, is actually significant. And there's a lot of sharing that goes on today. So I would say we've already got mechanisms there to capitalise on, which is a lot stronger than I've seen in other parts of the industry historically.
Thank you.
Thank you for that, Nicola. I would add that my initial reaction was there's a lot of collaboration going on already, but hearing Jeff speak, I realise actually there's huge amounts more that we can do on it as well. But remember, going back to the standard thing, we are hopefully all producing global products. If we're producing global products, we have to work together to produce the globally usable product.
Yeah, absolutely. So collaboration really is going to be key here, isn't it? I think we have got some more questions, but I think what I'd like to do, just so that we can try and keep people to time, because I'm mindful an hour and a half is quite a long time for our listeners, is we'll bring those to you and get those answered so we can feedback to the listeners. I mean, it's been such I can't tell you how much I appreciate your insights today. We've had a great comment from someone saying it's been a really open webinar, and I think you've been really open with your insights, and I greatly appreciate it. And what a wealth of knowledge we've had here. I think some key take homes for me have really been, you know, no surprise, the importance of education. You know, it's absolutely paramount that we do bring people on this journey. It's a disruptive technology, and, you know, making people understand what it is and what it isn't. I think also that really important thing around individuality, and it's going to become more important, you know, like Sam's starting point, that 3.5 million is not one big lump. It's made up of lots of different disease groups and individuals, and being able to understand that not one size fits all, and it's options and it's personal choice and individuality around decision making. But also really taking on board what Matthew's saying, which is that the investment is there, but perhaps the infrastructure and the protocols now need to all develop in parallel with it, so that those don't become the paralyzing factors within this piece. Also the great importance in this data and evidence generation. I think, you know, it's to move things forward, that's got to become really key. And also developing new evaluation, assessment and payment methods that are fit for what's coming here. It's new, and it needs new thoughts and new processes. So, you know, there's a huge amount of work obviously here to be done in terms of bringing it all together and collaborating, but certainly I feel we should have reason to feel optimistic. I think all of your insights into the future, and particularly, you know, Matthew, what you say about, you know, you think in your lifetime you will see a big shift in that. It certainly gives hope to all of us living with rare diseases and in this space to keep pushing forward and striving for better. So I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much. I would just like to say to anyone that did ask a question that wasn't answered, we will get back to you with those. We'll take those to the panel. And a huge thank you to our panelists for taking part, and to everyone for listening. Hope you've enjoyed it as much as we have. It's been a great conversation. Do feel free to reach out if you've got any further questions, or you'd like to be connected with anyone via the contact screen at the end. And just thank you so much to everyone. Have a great rest of your day. Take care. Bye.